Hey there, folks. Welcome to another edition of Stranger in a Southern Land. I, of course, am your host, Jake Manning. Today in the program, I speak with Michael Bochicchio, the owner and creator of highspots.com. Yes, that's right. I'm speaking with my boss, the man who signs my paychecks at highspots.com. And I thought this would be a conversation I'd have further down the road, but then I started looking at the calendar and I was like, you know what? WrestleCon's just right around the corner, and HighSpots is sponsoring and putting on WrestleCon. What better time than now to talk to Michael so we can get people to come out to WrestleCon? It seems like there's going to be a lot of people there. This sounds like it's going to be one of the biggest ones yet. And New Jersey and New Orleans were big, and San Jose did pretty well as well. We had a few bumps in the road, but we've learned from those mistakes, and Dallas has kind of positioned itself to be the best one yet. It's being held at the downtown Hyatt Regency, which is prime location if you're in town WrestleMania weekend, April 1st and 2nd. So WrestleCon is the can't miss hot ticket WrestleMania weekend. Well, other than WrestleMania, of course. But I'm just saying, if you're knocking around, you need something to do, WrestleCon's got everything for you, that's for sure. But also, too, I've always wanted to talk to Michael about the history of HighSpots, because when I'm on the road, people ask me all the time, how did HighSpots become a company? And it's got an interesting story. I mean, Michael started HighSpots out of his college dorm being a tape trader, and now he has this large entity now that sells wrestling rings, wrestling gear, knee pads, streams online content, Blu-rays, action figures, all types of merchandise from Japan and Mexico and Europe, and all corners of the world. You know, he's really, it's a pretty inspirational story and an interesting story, that's for sure. There's some stuff that I didn't even know happened in the history of highspots.com. So I'm very, very happy that he was able to sit down and talk to me. And also, too, he came in early before work one day and gave me a full hour to talk to him. So I'm very appreciative of that. Got a good boss, I guess you could say. But anyways, I got a couple of bosses I'm going to be working for this weekend, and that's Big Time Wrestling. This Friday, March 25th, I will be in Morganton, North Carolina, and then Saturday, March 26th, I will be in Bristol, Tennessee. I think I said Knoxville last week, but I will be in Bristol, Tennessee, both for Big Time Wrestling. For more information about those shows, I think there's going to be cage matches on those shows, but don't quote me on that. Just log on to btwpro.com, and especially if you want to get your tickets, log on there and you find out more information about that. And then the week after that, like I said, WrestleCon, April 1st and 2nd in Dallas, Texas at the downtown Hyatt Regency, which I feel like it's a pretty historic place from what I hear, at least what I've read on the site. But like I said, it's prime location. If you're in town for WrestleMania weekend in Dallas this year, WrestleCon is the place to be. Well, other than WrestleMania, but if you're there for WrestleMania, everything leading up into WrestleMania, WrestleCon is the place to be. And we've got everybody there, and there's more information about that. You can log on to WrestleCon.com. And if you can't make it to Dallas and you're like, hey, I wonder what Jake's doing. Hey, I wonder if Jake's on any adventures. Well, all you got to do is just follow me on social media. It's very easy to do. You could follow me on Twitter at ManScoutManning and on Instagram at ManScoutManning. If you have a question about the podcast, or if you want to become a sponsor of this podcast, make sure you email me at jake@sslshow.com. Or if you want to book me for an upcoming wrestling event, make sure you email me at manscoutmanning@yahoo.com. Anyways, without further ado, let's jump into this wonderful podcast with my boss, the man who signs my paychecks, Michael Bochicchio, the owner of highspots.com. Anyways, folks, I'm sitting here with my boss, Michael Bochicchio, owner and operator of highspots.com. This is going to be an interesting interview for me for multiple reasons, because I wanted to do it for quite some time, but I just, the timing had to be right, and the fact that we're on the eve of WrestleCon, the big event that HighSpots is putting on. I figured this is the best time to do it because hopefully people are listening to this on the way down to WrestleCon right now. They've purchased their tickets, but they're on their way. But if they're on the fence about and they're going to WrestleMania already, this is the kind of the sway them on that. So thank you for very much getting up early this morning. I know it's been a busy weekend, so Thank you very much for taking the time.
Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for letting us promote WrestleCon.
Yeah, and but before we get to WrestleCon, this is going to be interesting because, I don't know how many people know the history of highspots.com, I've just always been, I've always worried about is it pay week and where am I going this weekend? But the history of High Spots, I think, is very interesting. And also your history as well as a wrestling fan, I find is unique because you grew up in this area, which has been rich of wrestling history. You were originally from New York, but you grew up watching Mid-Atlantic wrestling. What was it like as a kid watching wrestling in this area?
Well, I remember having a Betamax machine, and wrestling was on really late, and I used to have my father record it, and I used to watch it the next morning because it was on well past my bedtime. And so for a couple of years, I followed it through television, and then when I got to be a little older and wrestling was at its hottest, I used to go to the Greenville Memorial Auditorium, and I used to kind of get to see everything on a Monday night down there. I used to have my mom was a manager of a Refco, which is a drugstore that's now CVS, and she had all the the teenagers that worked for her, and they all wanted to get over with the boss by taking the kid to the wrestling shows. So I had probably about 10 or 12 girls there that would fight to take the boss's kid to these wrestling shows, and then once a year my father would even take me to a wrestling show. He hated wrestling, but he was a good father, and he'd always well, we'll take you one time a year so you get to pick the show. And so I had a lot of great opportunities to kind of watch it in person. I was a believer. It was real to me. And
well, who were your favorites? Who was stuck out in your mind?
Well, for different reasons, I was mostly a fan of the villains, but at the same time, I was a really big fan of Ricky Morton specifically, just because he was the ultimate babyface, and quite honestly, back then, being a smaller kid, most of these guys were enormous. Or at least they were relative to my size. And I remember Ricky being such a small guy. I was like, you know what, I could be that guy. I could be that guy. So I kind of believed in, Ricky Morton like that. But generally, I was a fan of the villains. I mean, when the Four Horsemen had their run, I mean, I was front and center for being a fan on that ride.
Yeah, being a teenage boy, I'm sure seeing the Four Horsemen was what you wanted to be.
Oh, absolutely. And and with those girls, I mean, they not only were they wrestling fans, but they were stalkers, and I guess we call them groupies now. I didn't know what that was back then.
So these girls that are taking to wrestling events, hey, we have to wait an hour after the show to see these guys leave too.
That too, and I remember one distinct story of being babysat by Ron Simmons. Where I was,
that happened.
Yeah, we were at Greenville Auditorium, and one of the fans, she was particularly close to one of the wrestlers, and she disappeared for about an hour to do whatever it is that groupies do, and I was like, and I was a kid, and shouldn't have been left alone at an arena with, there was smoking then, and there were people, beer and stuff, so you shouldn't leave a kid that age alone. But Ron Simmons was like, I'm just gonna watch you for a little bit. It's all right, man. We'll just sit here and watch the show. And so
was she off with Butch Reed? Is that how that worked?
Yeah, well, that would have been a bad idea. But Ron Simmons, I mean, he certainly probably didn't remember it, but he was probably, God knows what she was doing.
I was gonna say, did you bring that up when you interviewed Ron Simmons?
No, I didn't. I should have. He probably was like, "Oh, which time?"
I did that.
He was probably the guy that watched over. But no, I did that. I remember, stalking a lot of these wrestlers at convenience stores. When they go after the show, they go pick up their 12-pack and stuff, and we magically knew where each wrestler would be after the show. I don't know. They had it down to a science.
Yeah, and you bring up Ricky Morton, and a lot of people talk about it, and a lot of the old timer wrestlers, they'll talk about how big wrestling was in this area. Is it just as big as what they describe, or you're going to give me an accurate portrayal? Was wrestling as big as what they talk about? It was just the thing, it was as huge as everybody says.
Now Charlotte's a really big city. People know who it is. They, Greenville, it's grown and stuff. But I mean, this was what gave this area an identity. There wasn't an NFL team. There really wasn't an NBA team until the Hornets came into town. I mean, it was NASCAR and it was wrestling. And, NASCAR didn't really have that national feel to it at that time. So, I mean, wrestling was treated like a real sport. I mean, it was covered in the sports papers. I mean, I remember I used to, if I didn't go to the Memorial Auditorium shows, I could read on Tuesday morning the results that happened there. And, and I followed it just like I would the Atlanta Braves, which was probably in my area, the closest major franchise that there was.
So you think it was almost like the fact that it was such a small area and it was the biggest thing going on was probably, Alex accelerated its popularity in this area?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, and now, I mean, there's just no way in a city like Charlotte it could
We got
survive.
an NBA team, you got a minor league baseball team, you got an NFL team that does very well. It's very hard to capture everybody's attention.
And TV, I
Yeah.
mean, who wants to go to these live events with all the great stuff that's on TV, with the 5,000 channels you have access to, or the Netflix? I mean, you lived in a time where you had 13 stations, and most of it was crap. I mean,
Well, 13 is far better than what I had. I had 4, and I'm younger than you.
well, that's why you're not living in Iowa anymore.
Exactly. I wanted to get more TV stations. That's why I
Right.
came here.
Sure.
But anyways, how do we get from you being a fan to being in law school, being a tape trader?
Well, like most people that grew up as a wrestling fan, there's a phase where you kind of lose interest in it, and I'd say that in high school I kind of lost interest in wrestling, mainly because I was doing amateur wrestling and I was pretty good at it, and an amateur wrestler certainly looked down at pro wrestling. It was almost like
Yeah, that's like the first thing they say day
right.
one.
And it's true. It's
Yeah.
absolutely true. But I mean, I never looked down on it. But it was like, yeah, when I was younger, I liked it. I mean, it was cool. And so then when I got to college, I really wasn't even doing wrestling. Wasn't even on my mind. And one of my fraternity brothers, one of the things we had to do in a fraternity is we had to interview each and every fraternity member. So it was basically taking them out to lunch or whatever they wanted to do. But you spent about an hour with them, and we had about 100 fraternity brothers. So, it could be a pretty exhausting semester. But one of them, he was a big wrestling fan, and we were struggling about anything else to talk about. When you wedge in one of these interviews, midweek, and he's like, you know what? He goes, let's go to a Smoky Mountain Wrestling show. And I was thinking, like, well, what happened? Like, I was like, I got my hour lunch and we're done here. And of course, you're like, I'm pledging. I'm like, oh, okay, let's go. Yeah. So, we went to it was that Night of Champions, that Night of Legends. It was the one with Lance Storm.
Okay.
And Chris Jericho, where Jericho about cut his head off. And Smoky Mountain Wrestling had TV in the Winston-Salem market, so you're able to follow it even after that. And so I got into that, and then he started showing me the Wade Keller sheets, and so I learned about ECW from almost the beginning. So I got caught up on that. The internet just started. It wasn't like the internet that we know today, but being on the university, you had amazing access to it, and so I started doing some tape trading because I had some old WWF. It was WWF videos, and then I was able to trade quite a bit, and I watched it. I got into Japanese wrestling, and then by the time I was in law school, I was like a full, I didn't have a lot of time to watch it at that point, but I was still doing a lot of trading, a lot of acquiring, and then selling the videos as well. So the seeds of my business were kind of planted there.
Yeah, and me and Cabana have talked about this. Is like we think that like the whole idea of tape trading is fascinating and completely unexplored, especially in like a podcast or an interview or a documentary. Like it's really fascinating how that kind of drove business for a while. And like how did you find out about it, then come in contact and even know what that is?
There were, and my memory's bad, so I'll probably butcher this. It was like rswp.wrestling, and there were all these like forums where you could kind of hang out with other people on the internet, and it was they weren't chat rooms, they weren't that kind of developed, but I mean you could basically make a post of sorts, and people would say, I have this thing, and then you'd write to that person.
You could type text, and then it would take 30 seconds for it to like finally post or upload.
I mean, and this is before you used to get pictures by having to like put the different parts of the picture together and then downloading it. I mean, so this was even before then. So there were these forums, and then when Prodigy and then America Online came on there, one of the things they offered were like these forums were actually kind of like were more visually appealing, and it'd be like wrestling fans post here. So those three things probably, Prodigy, and then later American Online, and then of course the RSVP, and I'm sure I got that wrong, were places where you met other people that wanted to do tape trading, and then you kind of quickly realized like what people had access to. I mean, somebody in the Northeast might have the ECW. I had the Smoky Mountain Wrestling. Someone else might have the Japan.
And you were just recording like off the TV and what you bought like back in the day.
And when I was a kid, I used to record everything because I had that Betamax, and then
Yeah.
I had a VHS, and for some reason, I don't know why, but I recorded everything. So, I mean, all the
And kept it even when you lost interest in it.
the Starcades, the Clash of Champions. I mean, all those things. I mean, I originally recorded every one of those, and somehow I had the foresight to record them. You had different tape speeds related to the quality. So I was always kind of a freak on the highest quality that I can get. I never recorded anything on SLP speed. It was always the highest quality I could ever find. So
yeah, I was the same way as a kid because my best friend in junior high school, he was a big wrestling fan, same thing. And he didn't have cable, but I just happened to get cable, and I would record on VHS, but of course I would always record over it. But I was recording Raw every week, handing him the tape on Tuesday. He would watch it. We would discuss it on Wednesday.
Right.
It was like how I did. I used to be a big tape head too and record all the pay-per-views and stuff like that. But that was a big thing, I think, for most wrestling fans in that era, was recording it, which now nobody ever thinks of it. They see a couple clips and they move right along.
Oh yeah, and I mean, and I've disposed of all those VHS tapes as originals. That's how attached you get to an era like this where everything's digital and everything's.
Well, even when we cleaned out your house, you were like, I don't know if I can throw away some of these VHS tapes. These are and then there was even your grandmother. You were talking about some of the Coliseum videos.
Yeah, my great grandma, who did not speak any English, she was a huge wrestling fan. And not surprisingly, a huge fan of Bruno Sammartino, being Italian herself. I remember going to her house, and this is as she was kind of bedridden at the end of her life, and she's like, "Take any of the videos you want. I want you to have one." So it's like, oh wow, it's just like back. There were all the Coliseum videos that I don't know where she got them from, but she had them, and she'd just play them over and
back
over
when they were
over
like
again.
$60 a piece.
Right. She had them. She probably rented them from a Blockbuster and never returned them or whatever. But so I grabbed that big event, with Ric Flair, Hulk Hogan and Paul Orndorff from Toronto, and I mean, I remembered my great grandmother exclusively off that video. It was just like that was my one memory. She passed, shortly after that. I was young, so it's one of those things you just associate a person with an item, and that was it. And I probably have that video somewhere. I can't imagine I was so callous I threw that one away. So.
No, I think it's on the back shelf, actually.
Thanks for saving me.
So. Well, I know exactly where it's at.
Okay.
Those are like a lot of things in this office. I just got a weird memory, but no. So you're collecting these tapes and you're trading. Like, what are you actively going after? What are you trading with people? You got the Smoky Mountain stuff that you're recording with this. Are you going? I think you even mentioned that you were seeing somebody in Memphis and you would go there and record USWA. While you were there, so you could actively trade it. Like, how far were you going out of the way to get this stuff?
Well, I mean, that was close. It was Nashville.
Nashville.
But a girl that I was dating at the time, she went to Vanderbilt, and this is fast forwarding a couple of years, and so she moved to Nashville to start medical school at Vanderbilt, and I was living there for a summer, and so I was recording all the USWA programs, and I was actually going to the USWA events. I think it was like on a Wednesday night all summer, and I had met a lot of guys that I was even trading and selling tapes like before I even walked into the building. It was like $100 worth of sales, a couple of videotapes, and it was kind of a community there, even in Nashville, Tennessee, at the fairgrounds. It was.
Well, how many VCRs did you have at that time? Like, were you have like a stack of stuff, recording stuff?
Yeah, it was. You call them daisy chaining them. So you can do something where there's like five in a row. Inputs into one, outputs into the other, and then you could make up to that many copies. But when the business got to its height, I mean, I probably had 25, 30 of those VHS going in. It's just such a slow process because it's not like DVD burns where you can
just put it in
there, leave, walk away. I mean, it's like if a video is 1 hour long, it takes 1 hour to record. There's no fast forward button on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that was always the big thing with that, and putting in, record, and then switching, and then the care of the master quality was always the thing too. Like, what was the thing? So what were some of the tricks that you learned doing that? Because I've worked on one of the things I did as a production assistant. I had a big project where I had to do like 1,000 VHS dubs of some program or whatever like that, and like just the care and then the constant on the clock and stuff like that. Like, what were some of the tricks that you used when you were dubbing all these VHS tapes?
Well, I did learn that those those gold cables that they say they transfer quality better than the others. I really believe it. I mean, the quality of the connectors was a big deal, at least at the consumer level of those VHS machines. And then buying certain VHS machines obviously had a big impact on it. But you had to keep the you had to keep everything clean. I mean, we had a lot of times where the master videos, they they would break, and you have to know how to repair them. And I'm sure you've done your share of that as well.
Yeah.
So I became an expert on fixing those. But and then just always trying to get to the source. I was always very prideful that my collection was top quality. So I knew who had the masters of everything, and I would only trade with those people or buy from those people. Jeff Lynch was a big tape dealer at the time, and if you wanted Japanese videos, that would be the place to go. So I probably got a big part of my collection from him.
So it was a big thing. Like you get the collection, then you sell it off other places at shows or wherever. That was kind of
and
business model.
At some point, like you wouldn't have anything that I wanted, and so it gets to the point where we're not bartering anymore with VHS tapes. Where I'm selling them to you. So it turned it into a business that started with tape collecting and trading, but eventually when you have the better stuff and you have the stuff that everybody else wants, I mean, you can turn around and make a business out of it. And there were a lot of guys that didn't want to trade. They just, listen, I want to see the stuff. I'll just pay you. It's done.
Mm-hmm. So like how many guys do you think were tape trading at that time? Like how many guys were you running into? Was it like a lot? Do you think it was like in the hundreds, or like you think it was a small group?
At the time, it felt like a really small group, but 20 years later, and I hear all these people talking about, I traded a tape with you back and then, and you're like, oh, okay. Or I remember seeing you. I was having a conversation with Chris Hero last week, and apparently we were tape trading, 20 years ago. And I don't remember, but.
Mm-hmm. Well, how did it go from just like, I'm selling some tapes, I'm making a little extra cash? Like, how did it turn into a business? Like, what was the point where you were like, oh, this is a business and I'm making money off of it?
It probably was a business when I was in law school. I just didn't kind of call it a business. But I mean, it was making real money and while I was in law school, but I was giving it very little time just because law school was taking up so much of it. And then when I graduated law school, it was on the verge of when the internet kind of exploded. And I kind of sensed that there was something special about this internet thing going on. And I said, you know what? I think if I give it all my attention, I can make a real business out of this. And I didn't want to miss that opportunity. So when I graduated law school, I moved to Charlotte. Two friends that got a place in downtown Charlotte, and I lived in the basement. They gave me the garage to run it, and I just said for the first year, I'm going to give it 100% of my attention, and if it takes off as a business, I've struck gold, and if not, I'll go back. I'll sit for the bar, and I'll go back to doing what the process of what I'd done all my life up to that should have been. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to be a lawyer, all that money that you spent on college.
Right.
And now you're running a business out of your garage. So what was year one? Was it highspots.com at that time?
No, we weren't even incorporated. It was just kind of High Spots. And, it changes. Like I kept the phone right by my ear. I did have a phone number so people can call. And there was not a chance I was going to miss any phone call, any sales lead that came in. Mm-hmm. I took it very seriously, and I think anybody that starts a business has to kind of have that mindset, or else it'll never come off the ground. I mean, it takes 100% of your effort and energy, and thankfully, at 20 whatever I was at that time, I mean, I had that energy to give because I couldn't imagine starting up a business now. I mean, it just takes up too much energy, but I would never miss a sales lead, and I worked really hard at it. I learned that. The internet was taking off, but it's also I had to do the live events. I had to do the flea markets. I mean, you had to pound the pavement to really kind of make ends meet at that time. But it's not such a long drawn out story. I mean, I came in at a really great time. I came in, with Austin being super popular, so it was the height of wrestling. It was the height of the internet. I mean, all the things just kind of fell in a row, and it wasn't that much of a struggle. It took off pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm. And I must bring up this story if you want to share it, because I remember you telling me about this. Because weren't you running like your website off of like the Wake Forest like server at one point in time?
Yes. When I was in law school, this is before you could go to like GoDaddy and buy a domain. It was like
or Squarespace.
Right. It was like wfu.edu/highspots or ~sign highspots. I believe was the thing. And I'm not really sure how they discovered it, other than maybe the traffic. They kind of measure the traffic. It was probably somebody trying to report me or something. But I got called into the dean of law school office, and I had no idea what it was for. I mean, it was just like, why would the dean want to speak to me?
Yeah.
And
like, I barely want to be a lawyer. Why would
right.
Why would you talk to
it's
me?
Like, man, I must have really screwed up in class somewhere.
It's not to tell me how great I'm doing, because I really don't care.
And I stayed out of trouble, so it was kind of unexpected to know like what I was going in there for. And and I wasn't that great of a student where I was expecting to get some sort of award either. So it was kind of like nerve wracking. And so he said, "Hey," he goes, I noticed that you were running a little side business," and I was like, "Yeah," and he says, "I think that's great and all, but you're not allowed to do it on the university servers." So he was really cool about it. And
Well, obviously, that sounds like a very cool conversation. Unlike the conversation that my father got when he knocked out the entire power of the university when he was in college.
yeah, probably did a little more damage.
Yeah, that was not a good conversation.
So I think the dean appreciated the entrepreneurial spirit, and he said, could you just take it down? He goes, "I'll give you a couple of days. I'm sure you can't do it right away, but if you wouldn't mind, if you could just kind of take it down and maybe move it over." And there were options that you could pay for and put it up by that time, and so that we switched it over, and then we got the highspots.com page after that, I believe. I don't think there was anything in between those two, but I'm not sure without the access to the university servers that High Spots would have lasted. I mean, there would have been at least a gap there before you were able to do the .com.
Now, a lot of people like during that made it a business. You look at RF Video, and he just solely did videos for a while, and some T-shirts and stuff like that. But you were doing like masks and T-shirts. What was your thought process? I mean, you could have just stuck with VHS tapes. What was your thought process in branching out into, like I said, the lucha masks from Mexico and T-shirts? What was your thought process in branching out as far as a business?
Well, the story is that the same girl that I went to Vanderbilt for, she had an opportunity to study archaeology in Mexico, in the Chiapas region. So that's the southern part of Mexico, below Mexico City. And she was scared out of her mind to actually go down there alone and do it. So she said, "Listen, everything's paid for. You just need to come, just
make sure nothing bad happens."
Right. Basically be my bodyguard. And,
So that time wouldn't have been so bad. Now you would probably have to go with the full artillery.
Right. So, I thought it was a great opportunity too to actually, get to go down to the Chiapas region and
yeah, because you're getting these tapes of CMML and AAA, especially AAA.
And one day on the way back in Mexico City, I mean, we were literally flying back. Our hotel happened to be next to Arena Mexico, and all these street vendors put out all these wrestling masks, and I had a couple $100 left in my pocket, and I was like, "Wow, these things are amazing." We were going to go to the show, but I ended up spending every dollar. I mean, literally every dollar I had on these masks because I could see the potential, and I could say, "Wow, these things are amazing. I could turn around and sell these." So, I mean, that's what I did. A couple $100, bought everything I could. I met a couple of mask makers, and then it turned into I went down to Mexico. I mean, I've been there about 20 times now, but I used to go down there every single break I could find. I'd load up my bags. I'd take a friend or two down there so I could have their bags, and bring them back and sell them. And it turned into a real business. There was great margins on the mask. Before.
Was anybody really doing that at that time?
No. It was before the. Shortly after that, the Japanese figured out, let me go down to Mexico and clean out their stuff, because really the best stuff is down there. The old magazines, the old masks. There were so many really talented individuals making really creative stuff down in Mexico, and until the Japanese kind of like took it over, and I think I was
When
only
they took
one.
it over, they just came in and bought it.
Well, the Japanese, what they do, and they still have it today, they send people down there, and they're stationed down there. They buy stuff, they send it back to Japan. I mean, there's a girl now there. Then she hosts the wrestlers when they come in. She buys the merchandise. I mean, it's Ultimo Dragon was running Toriyamon, or his gym and his thing. I mean, so there was a very big Japanese group that would be based down in Mexico a couple of years after I did. But I cleaned them out pretty good. I mean, I still have magazines and masks, and we used to make these concrete. Hand-painted action figures, these little concrete plaster masks. I mean, there were so many things to take back and sell, and I mean, that was what made my business unique, is having access to these items. I mean, anybody could have VHS tapes if they were smart and they wanted to work hard at it, but I mean, nobody could get these handmade masks like I was getting, and it ended up moving into like the wrestling gear and the wrestling boots. So, it just seemed like there was nothing that I was buying that I couldn't resell.
Mm-hmm. Like. What was the thought process in branching out further into even just the wrestling gear and stuff like that? Like, because you've always, ever since I've been here, we've always expanded our product line further and further and further every year. What was that thought process of like branching out so far?
Well, I mean, it's really just revenue driven. It's just realize that if something you run into the same fans, the fans become the wrestlers. The wrestlers are still the fans. So I mean, you're kind of selling the same products to the same base. So Jake Manning needs a pair of wrestling boots. He needs some trunks, but he's still a fan, so he's going to buy those VHS tapes. So I mean, it's just seeing that my same fan base that I already had would pay for these items.
And where were you getting your gear originally made in the beginning? Was it just Mexico?
Completely in Mexico.
Yeah.
And that was very frustrating because now I can send an email to my contacts in Mexico if I have any issues and stuff. I used to have to call on the phone, and we used to schedule a time, and my Spanish wasn't good enough to where I could if there was a problem, I couldn't explain it to them. I could order something basic, but once we do a problem, my Spanish wasn't good enough. So I actually had a translator, a guy named Roger, and we'd spend a week, an hour every week, and he would translate every issue I had, or they would tell me every concern they have, and that was how I ordered from Mexico every week.
Yeah, I think you were still even doing that when I first got here in 2005.
Possibly.
You were scheduling like once a week where you'd have to call someone on the phone and read it in Spanish, especially when we had like Christopher DeSalas here. I'm like, oh, finally somebody can speak Spanish. And it turns out you were still the best speaker of Spanish in the office.
Yeah, I just can't understand it, but yeah. still speaking. So.
And also the boots. That was always like I remember a lot of people always talk about getting masks very early in their career, like you were just talking about, like people were the fans and then become the wrestlers. It seemed like there were a lot of people that always picked up the mask when they were fans, but then their first pair of wrestling boots were always high spots boots. Now, I've heard like the process of us getting the boots made is like pretty ridiculous. Like you have to send them the order, they send it out to somebody, and then it's like out in the middle of nowhere. They make it and they put it on the back of a goat and they bring it into Mexico City and then it's shipped to us. Like I hear the process is pretty ridiculous.
I can't confirm the goat.
Okay,
but the boots are made in Leon, Mexico, by a family that's been making these for longer than I've been around. But the person that I order from, the family that I order from, is based in Mexico City. They make the masks, they make a lot of the outfits, but the boots are still done with a family in Leon. So they're a couple hours apart. So every once in a while they'll drive to Leon, they'll pick up the boots, they'll bring them back to Mexico where we ship them. So.
Yeah, because usually by the time the box ends up at our office, it explodes.
Yes.
Like the second that they drop it in our office, the box has had enough. And it's basically been shipped in the middle of nowhere and traveled and go all the way. And that's why I always tell people is to get our Mexico boots as opposed to like the cheap boots that they find online, because it's like handcrafted by people who've been making boots since.
And still with real leather, even though that's something that may change shortly. But, they're still made with real leather, which is very uncommon for most boots now.
Yeah, and they're made by people that have been making boots since the original Santa was around.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Probably.
So anyways, as it became a business and bigger, like it was in the garage, what was the next step past the garage?
Getting out of the garage.
Getting out of the garage.
Yeah, it was getting out of the garage. Bought a house. Then it slowly took over the entire house. And
the Queen Charlotte Court house would be the next step.
Yep. And, it was a blessing because I bought a house that was much too large for myself.
Yeah, it was pretty large. It was just you and your wife at the time. It was a very large house.
Well, before you, I had two roommates.
Okay.
And so they basically helped me pay the rent. And I used like the entire downstairs to run my business and to live. And then I gave them the upstairs. So it got to a point where, I had so much inventory and things were so crazy. It wasn't a house anymore. They were living upstairs in an office. And after I got married and my wife just finally exploded in like this, we can't live like this anymore. I lost the roommates, the wife. She kind of took control of, the direction of the house. Like we have to move out.
Yeah, and from what I remember, it was like pretty ridiculous. Like you had like lucha masks in the sink.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
It was just
we used to do when we were doing shoot interviews around that time, and I used to try to change the backdrop of every interview just so it kind of didn't look the same. And I mean, so there were people that did interviews in my bathroom or in a hallway or every room in the house at some point had been used as a backdrop for one of the interviews we did.
Yeah, and about that time you were like getting into action figures, which are big bulky items that are in big boxes. And I think when I was at the house in 2005. Like you had like action figures down the hallway, like just stacked up like 3 high and stuff like that. I can imagine that being a little bit annoying. And that's even before you even got this office here.
Yeah, and when I got this office here, it was a big warehouse where I could move everything to, and it allows you to hire people. I mean, think about you're married and you want to hire somebody because you really need the help. We had outgrown the ability to run the business by ourselves, but you don't want to bring in a stranger into your home. But I mean, that's essentially what you have to do when you have a home-based business. So.
And then, of course, probably about that time you were converting over to DVDs and stuff like that, and doing VHS. Like what was that business like? I came in like on the tail end of VHS sales. Was there ever a time where the VHS and the DVDs were the exact same, or like?
Oh yeah, I'm sure at some point, it was 50-50. I mean, I couldn't identify, but it didn't take that long. I mean, VHS tapes, when you look back at them, like why? I mean, DVDs were so much smaller, cleaner, just better quality.
Yeah,
so.
Absolutely, just portable and everything. But you've always been very big in buying in bulk, and I remember there is books that still are in this office today, where you went to a book sale and you bought by the pound. And I remember there was a funny story about the semi truck pulling up to your house and dropping off these books by the pound.
I believe it was either DK Publishing or Sports Publishing. They went out of business, and they had produced like the Meltzer books and the Dynamite Kid books and trivia books, and they called me out of the blue and like, hey, we noticed we just got all these wrestling books and we're out of business. We're just looking to liquidate. Would you be interested in buying up our inventory? And I was like, oh yeah, sure. If it's a good deal, I'll certainly buy it. And they're like, well, we'll sell it to you by the pound. And of course, I'd never bought anything by the pound before, except maybe meat at the supermarket. But I was like, okay, and if it's every book, what does it come to, and how many books would I get? And like, well, we can't really say how many books. It's several thousands and stuff. And they gave me the price, and I was like, oh, why not? I mean, people still buy books. I mean, it's a great item to have.
Yeah, books are heavy. It seems like I'm getting a good deal here.
And an 18-wheeler showed up at the thing. They're like, hey, I got your package. And I was thinking like it might be like sometimes you'll get a big 18-wheeler and there's like a couple of boxes on the back.
Yeah, you get two pallets, and then you got to find it.
And we opened it up, and the whole thing is there. And I was like, oh, God. Like, what did I do? So, we ran and got the biggest storage space I could find, and that was like $500 a month, which was kind of ridiculous to spend that on the books. But I mean, hey, I know you're judging me for these books, but we used them just yesterday to jack up a trailer. So
I know we still have those tributes books. I'm not judging. I think
they're actually cheaper than bricks, I believe.
Yeah,
so.
I think we've made our money back. But like the joke when Charlie Dreamer was here was that these tribute books are like triples. In Star Trek, they just keep multiplying and keep finding more and more of them. It's amazing that you probably made that deal about 2004, 2003, I'm guessing.
Probably.
And still, 13 years later, we still have tributes books and Dynamite Kid books.
And that's after giving away essentially free to everybody who would buy. I mean, if you were a customer of High Spots at the checkout, there's like, hey, would you like this free item? It was always the tributes books. So.
Yeah, because we have them by the pound.
Right.
There's just no way to really even know. You've probably made your money back on it, I'm assuming.
Yeah, it would be kind of hard to do the math on it at this point, but probably so.
Yeah, because I remember asking like how much we got in these, and you're like, I don't know, I bought these by the pound.
Couldn't tell you.
Couldn't tell you. But anyways, when we moved to the office here, and now you're big. You've got a big office. How did that feel? Like it's like I started this business in basically my dorm room. And now I have this huge office and filled with employees.
Well, I look at everything long term. I always have. Like I don't lease things. I don't rent things. I just unless it's a very short term rental. It's always been my mindset that's the economics background in me is just that's a bad long term play. So I built this office. I didn't lease it. I didn't rent it, and so I bought the land. I paid off the building, and I've always looked at this as like if I can keep High Spots going long enough where High Spots pays me for the rent, I'll have a great asset, maybe when I'm ready to retire. And so that's kind of the way I've looked at it for all these years. So, I mean, I look at the business as like when I become 60, I want to be able to retire, and have I put myself in that position to do so.
And you've branched this thing out almost maybe as far as you can branch it out. Like we do wrestling rings now. What was the thought process in that?
Again, it's just you saw an opportunity. I'm going to break.
Yeah, hold on a sec. That's all right. It's busy.
Fortunately, you know how to edit, so.
Yeah, well, I'll probably just leave it. It's fine. It's no big deal. It's a busy place, Michael. It's a hustle and bustle now. It's not like 2005 where it was just,
Well, I turn the phone off and then nobody bothers me, right?
Exactly. It's not like that anymore. But
no, everything I do, it's just you meet so many people that I feel like I can market it better. And I've run into so many people, whether they're gear makers or wrestling ring manufacturers, that I could kind of see what they're doing is like I can make money on this, and my brain just always works that way. It's like I know I can make money on this. So,
What was probably like the best thing that you did? Like it was just like, oh, this was a good idea to start doing this.
so you're saying not buying books by the pound?
No, I mean I don't know if books by the pound so much. Maybe the shipping you'll lose a little bit on that. What were like of all the things that you've like? Oh, this was good. Was it the rings? Was it the gear?
Instead of it being one project, I think that people know High Spots because we do so much. I think that like RF Videos kind of put themselves in a position where they're not diversified enough, and I know that they struggle, if they don't have a hot product to sell that month. I mean, it's tough, and we're a different company than someone like them or someone else that kind of just does video or just does wrestling gear. I mean, we do enough of everything where if I certainly downsized in any way, I can make just a business off the gear. I can make just a business off the video. But because we do so much, I think that one plays into the other. Obviously, if you're a wrestler, I mean, we're the one-stop shop.
Mm-hmm.
So there's nothing that I don't sell that you would potentially need.
Was that your business plan? Like, I'm going to get money from you from some avenue whatsoever?
Yeah, and I mean, then sometimes you realize, like on wrestling figures, it gets to a point, and it's probably the first time where I ever looked at it and said, you know what, I need to stop trying to do everything, and it was really just a space issue. If I had the space, we'd be selling action figures too, just because we could.
And we did for a while. Like
Yeah,
we
we
hit
did.
those ECW, WCW figures, which
And if someone calls me with a really great deal, we will again. So,
yeah, and we've cleaned out Wrestling Superstore several times.
yes. Yeah.
There's still things on those sites, those big bundles we haven't even like put into packages, like those demolition juice cups. Like I just give those away as soon as I see somebody that thinks they're cool, like because we've got thousands of those.
But the key, I think the key in running this business has always been being able to see the future. You kind of see where we're headed and not be kind of trapped by the mistakes or of things you've done in the past. Like I really, and probably more so than most people, really believe DVDs are at the very, very, very edge of collapsing.
Yeah, we've been hanging on to it for quite some time.
I mean, somehow Pro Wrestling Guerrilla defies all logic and people still collect the DVDs. But I think if we were to make them available digitally, that even that would drop off to quite a bit. But
yeah, especially in this digital age, I think if we posted it online in a digital format, it would probably completely change.
But what a lot of people don't realize is that that doesn't always mean that's better for us as a business. Because,
it doesn't really generate anything for anybody else, and sometimes that makes it a little bit easier for people to trade that much, like tape trading.
Right.
Was.
There's definitely a lower value to a digital media product than there is like a DVD, and as a business that's frustrating because you know what something's worth, but you can't sell it at that price. At least digitally, you can't.
And also the important thing with PWG, with it being a premier wrestling promotion like itself, is now that we're doing Blu-rays, right now at this moment in time that we do this interview in 2016, we're not getting full on 1080 quality files on the internet, just streaming wise in a sense, and you could probably get downloads, and there are sites that offer that, but not everybody, especially wrestling fans, have that type of internet connection where they can get that accessibility and stream without any buffering issues whatsoever. But like the Blu-rays of PWG are incredible. Like I sit at home and watch it, and it's just as good as being in Reseda. Which
almost as good.
Almost as good in Reseda. Like you don't feel it, but like as far as look and what you see in your eye is just as good as that.
Oh yeah, undoubtedly.
Yeah, and how did that relationship with PWG start? Since we're discussing it right now and talking how wonderful and great it is.
Well, I'm going to give credit to Robert Bahari. He's a Canadian guy who loves his lucha libre, and he kind of like lined me up with Super Dragon at the time, and it was really it was more of an ego-driven decision. Smart Mark had their connections, and Ring of Honor kind of did their own thing, and I was kind of like looking for, well, what could High Spots really help brand not make their own, but kind of support.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, PWG was running some really great shows, loaded shows with super indie talent. That was kind of the theme at the point, is who ran the best super indie shows.
Mm-hmm.
And they had so many owners at the time, but nobody had any money, so that's where High Spots could kind of step in, and we lost quite a bit of money for the first couple of years on Pro Wrestling Guerrilla. Doing the math, it didn't make any sense. But I kind of believed in the product. I mean, they were putting on some great shows. And I believe that the hardest thing with independent wrestling, probably less so now because everything's instant access, is just getting people to realize they exist. You get a group like Combat Zone who, DJ's going to hate me for saying this, but they're probably not the premier indie group anymore, but because they were for so many years and they produce so many great moments, like people know what Combat Zone is.
Yeah, they have a perception. They have an idea when they hear that, and that rings in their head. And sometimes that perception is, especially with them with the death matches, sometimes it's this, and sometimes their perception is Sami Callihan and the Adam Cole matches that they had. They put out a lot of wrestling like that. It's sometimes you have to overcome those things, and that's what you become.
And in the beginning, Pro Wrestling Guerrilla had to overcome that. No one knew who they were. I mean, they recognized some of the names, but no one knew who they were. And so until they kind of like hit their stride and kind of became a household name among the people who watch indie wrestling, I mean, it was a real money loser. And now, it's the complete opposite. Now it's a very big part of our business.
Yeah, and now that I've been uploading it to the High Spots Network and stuff like that, it's just interesting to see how it evolved. Like I remember people being aware of it at All-Star Weekend 1, and it was kind of hot for a while, and then it kind of leveled off. And then about 2009, as I go through it now, you start to see the seeds of what it is right now and the pieces that are so well placed right now. And it's just amazing. And I was just thinking about, like, literally before we started this, I was like, man, this is 2009, and they're just starting to piece it together. They'd been around since 2003, so they've been around for 6 years, and then it took another 6 years, 7 years almost, to kind of figure out this model that they have right now. It's just really.
And I remember having a conversation with Super Dragon where we were looking at the numbers, and I was like, Dragon, like, I'm not sure our relationship makes a lot of sense for me anymore. We're just not selling enough DVDs to kind of continue this, and he had so many other people bailing on him, as a co-owner. Like, I mean, I don't think he would have been surprised if I would have bailed. And I was like, just maybe we need to look at this again shortly. And then, you run the Bolas and the All-Star Weekends, and they always did great, and then the other shows didn't. But we stuck with it, and then I think like all these indie companies, you overcome. There's at some point where you either jump off or you catch on, and for them they finally caught on. Thankfully for both of us.
Yeah, and now it's just a well-oiled machine, and just keep putting it out there and doing creative stuff, and every year just keeps getting better and better, and every show is just better and better.
And there are other groups that I would say that run shows that maybe are as good as what PWG is, but because PWG has so consistently run good shows, I mean, they've got that aura about them.
Yeah, absolutely. But, speaking of live events, you've got a very big live event coming up, WrestleCon, which started, a couple years ago. We've done our wrestle reunions. We've done our conventions here. That's one of the things, not just, merchandise, but we've also branched out into live events. What made you want to get into live events in general, like even like in the wrestle reunion era that we were with for a while?
Yeah, Wrestle Reunion was kind of the seeds. I was working with Sal Corrente, and the first two Wrestle Reunions we went to as a vendor. I believe we brought the wrestling ring to both of those.
Yes, the trip from hell, as I call it.
Right. I'll let you tell that story, but
yeah.
We. I could kind of see the potential in the model, but, it just never seemed like when we were running with the Wrestle Reunion brand, even when High Spots was the sponsor of it for, I think, numbers 3 through 7 or 3 through 6 or whatever we did, it never really caught on. You really needed to latch on to the WrestleMania weekend where you have all these international fans coming in that, Tito Santana, not to discredit him in any way, but Tito Santana is still a big deal to someone who's never met Tito Santana from Europe. I mean, they know his history, whereas maybe he's been at all these other conventions here in the U.S.
He's done Monroe, New Jersey, at least probably 50 times.
Right. One of the nicest wrestlers you'll ever meet.
Yeah.
But I mean, he has more value to that kind of crowd, and so you're able to do what we do at WrestleCon successfully, whereas maybe without the benefit of all the people in town for WrestleMania, it wouldn't be nearly as successful. And I think the WrestleCon brand has grown over the years, and we've, I think Dallas particularly is going to be, the best one we've ever had. Certainly the numbers are projecting that way.
Yeah, because I remember the first year we did in New Jersey was pretty ridiculous, and all the wrestling that we had, and I felt like that kind of propped everything up to the fact that we had Chikara and I think Shimmer and Evolve, Dragon Gate, $5 Wrestling, and probably another, and CZW as well. I think that really propped the whole thing up.
And the goal was to have one roof where everybody other than WWE could come together and kind of like showcase their best, because there is so much great talent out there. There's so many great ideas out there. We wanted to be the venue to provide that, and that's all WrestleCon was supposed to be. And of course, the politics of everything. I think that success kind of hurt us in some ways because everybody's like, man, I could really make some money on this WrestleCon weekend. I don't no WrestleMania weekend. I don't need WrestleCon. I'll do it myself. And so then we started to see people kind of go on their own and do their own things, and that's fine if it works for them. But I know everybody had their best moments in New Jersey, the biggest crowds they've ever had in New Jersey, and I think it was a real lesson learned that when the wrestling community kind of like comes together as opposed to like digging at each other, it really does benefit everybody.
Yeah, I mean, it's I think from the beginning, and even when we were talking about the name, the ComicCon of professional wrestling is the idea that, you know, like ComicCon, you have different movie studios. You have Warner Brothers and Universal and all these different, and, you know, Marvel studios. They all come together, and every entertainment outlet is just trying to get to Comic-Con because they're getting everybody under one roof, and that's what the seeds were, is to bring everybody together, the autographs, the signings, because, you know, for a while before, you know, we were doing it, things were kind of segmented off. There'd be like a Tito Santana autograph signing in a hotel the morning before WrestleMania, and then Ring of Honor would run something. And if it was in the area of PWG would run something. You know, it was kind of segmented off, but for it to be all under one roof, I think it was very novel and great idea for wrestling in general.
Yeah, I mean, it was just a matter of time. If we hadn't done it, somebody else would have.
Yeah.
So.
It just, you know, luckily through our trial and errors, through wrestle reunions and everything else that we've tried to run and put together, it all just came to a forefront with WrestleCon.
I think the staff, maybe not yourself because you did a lot of the legwork, but I think the staff really liked those wrestle reunions. Just, you know, those are fun weekends. I mean, you meet so many of the people that buy from you online, and you get to put a face with them, and you meet and get to work with a lot of the great wrestlers, and then you filter out the ones that aren't so great. But you know, we're still wrestling fans first and foremost, and getting to work with all these big names and stuff like we do at WrestleCon, like we did with Wrestle Reunion. I mean, that's a really fulfilling part of what we've been doing for years.
Yeah, and I know you've discussed this with a lot of people before, like your Cole Cabanas and the Chris Heroes. You're like, you know, people that I do business with during the year. You know, this is kind of like your reward because it's going to be some of the larger crowds. Here's your opportunity to sell as much merch as you can. Here's your opportunity. I'm going to book you for this, put you on a show. It's going to have at least 1,000 people watch it. I'm going to put you in a good match, and, you know, this is your reward as well, you know. And
people don't understand when you go to these towns and you see these independent shows. I mean, a lot of guys are working for peanuts, you know, gas money, and we're scraping by and they're scraping by. And then it's nice to go to a WrestleCon, WrestleMania weekend where, you know, the money's there, the people's there, and it's a big reward for all the other times in the year that you're basically working for peanuts.
Absolutely. But you know, what's in store for Dallas? What are the big attractions? You know, what are the things that you're hearing right now? What are people most excited for?
I'm most excited about the Dallas Cowboy Cheerleaders, just being at an event. Just the idea that I'd have the iconic cheerleaders coming to a wrestling show. You know, it wouldn't work anywhere else. It doesn't make sense. But when you have that many people coming into town, and people, I think, associate Dallas with like the cheerleaders and, you know, the hats and stuff like that.
And
so,
the idea that it's a little bit mainstream. You know, we're reaching out further than wrestling. You know, like I think it was. Didn't we have Dennis Rodman in Miami too?
Yep. A vendor brought in Dennis Rodman. We had Mike Tyson in Los Angeles when we were running the Wrestle reunions.
Yeah, just when you have those little things that pull in from different areas.
I tried to get Jenna Jameson in San Jose, Silicon Valley. I just thought that would be kind of an interesting tie-in. Probably glad it didn't work out.
Yeah, that might have been a headache. she might be the Sunny of the porn world. Might be hard to deal with.
She might have been. It would have been pretty cool to say she was there. And then, so I'm pretty excited about the cheerleaders. And then, of course, Shawn Michaels has been kind of the headlining name for us. Legends of the Ring is bringing in Shawn Michaels, and, you know, although his tickets have been sold out for months, I mean, he's still kind of the biggest star we have there. And when you have someone like Shawn Michaels, who's so closely affiliated with WWE, kind of like agree to do our event, it has a domino effect. And then other guys that are kind of connected to WWE kind of realize, like, hey, this is a good payday for me. And that's why they do it, honestly. I mean, you know, they work for Vince throughout the year. They're under some sort of contract with Vince, but I mean, when they go to these events, I mean, they're compensated very well.
Yeah, they scoop in all that extra cash because there's just people out there and they want to enjoy professional wrestling, and this is their vacation. You know, and you want to give them as many opportunities as possible, because like I always tell people, like, WWE Access can only service so many people. If everybody just went to Access, then the lines would be 4 hours long, you
Right.
know, and it'd just be ridiculous. But if everybody kind of spreads out and does their own thing and picks and chooses and a la cartes everything, it's just better for wrestling in general.
And there's a lot of younger stars that will be at WrestleCon that if you look 5 years from now when you go to, they're going to be at Access. And if you look backwards, the guys that are kind of on top of WrestleMania now, and they're going to be in those high-profile spots, a lot of them have been in our past events.
Just
So-
even Kevin Steen wrestled Masato Tanaka last year.
2 years ago.
2 years
Yep.
ago, excuse me. Yes, and now he'll probably be on WrestleMania right now.
Mm-hmm.
So it's big. It's great. You know, what else about Dallas or where you want to let people know about?
Well, I just think in general that weekend, if you're a wrestling fan, it's. I had the opportunity to go to the Super Bowl this year, and as a football fan, it was just an amazing experience. And if you're a wrestling fan, you have to just take advantage of that week, even if you're not a really big fan of what WWE is putting on TV right now. It's the ultimate fan week. It is. There's so much to do, and WrestleCon we hope is a big part of what they do. The people that travel there, but even if WrestleCon's not your thing, there's so much stuff to do as a wrestling fan. It's one of those things you have to check off. If you can't make it in Dallas next year in Orlando, we've already started our planning and we've got our venues set for Orlando.
Was that what you did last week?
That's what we did last week. As soon as WrestleMania was announced, I got on the next flight.
I was gonna say, I was like, maybe he's going to like ACC tournament. Then it looked like no, Wake Forest already lost.
Yeah,
No
they
reason for him
already
to
lost.
go. I was like, then he must be going to Orlando.
I broke the 20-year streak of going to the ACC tournament this year. By the way, Wake Forest was that bad that I said, you know what, I can't do it. I can't.
Well, I can't talk much either. Iowa didn't last very long in the Big Ten, and Iowa State didn't do well in the Big 12. So I've got no room to talk. So
But yeah, these Mania weekend conventions. I mean, they take a lot of planning. You have to get the right spot. You have to find the right spot to make it work. You have to make it convenient for the fans. I mean, you have to be so close to where WWE is running their events. If you're too far away, we've learned.
Especially San Jose was a little bit of that, and New Orleans was an example of how well we could do. Like New Orleans was pretty ridiculous.
And and New Orleans was ridiculous, and I know a lot of people stayed away from us in San Jose because they had a bad experience in New Orleans. It was before we figured out that scanning these tickets makes things a lot easier than trying to check people in. So.
That's the thing. Now it's a lot easier to get these live events things. There's a lot more things available to us, and we can get through these lines quicker. So
yeah, and the whole WrestleCon process is a great learning experience for us. Operationally, we weren't equipped to do it in New Orleans. We figured out what we did wrong in San Jose, and I think Dallas for us, we're going to have the crowds and the excitement that we had in the past, and we're going to have the operational know-how to get people through the lines and make it a great experience for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. I think this is going to be a big one because I think we've got great location. We've got figured out. We're all old hands at this by now, so I think.
And this is the first time I'm really excited to go to WrestleMania itself. I mean, in the past, it's been we work so hard, so little sleep, and by WrestleMania, we just want to take a nap, or at least I do. And
You're not the only one.
but I mean, I'm super excited about seeing Dallas Stadium. I mean, it's just going to be amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well. Anyways, let people know before we let people know about like where they can get tickets for WrestleCon and about high spots and stuff like that. Even though you're my boss, I can't let you off the hook on my big theme of the podcast and the big end question that I always put.
Okay.
I can't let you off the hook. I talk to different people, as you know, walks of success, so wrestlers, comedians, talk to the mayors, people who run breweries and stuff like that. And the thing I always talk about them, especially at this point in time in the podcast, is the idea of success. Like, what does that mean to you? Do you think it's obtainable? What's your idea of it? Like, what's your goal of it? Like when I say the word success, what do you think of?
I think success for me is knowing that life's not about worrying about whether I'm going to have my bills paid next week. It's not, or even next month. And for me, success is knowing, I've taken on the responsibility of several people in this office and a lot of vendors that work for us, and making sure that they know the same, that they don't have to worry if their paychecks are going to clear. And so, me, we're in a really good space right now. We've had our struggles over the years when the economy's dipped, but I mean, success for me is knowing that everybody that I feel like I have to take care of in some way is taken care of.
Mm-hmm. And when times get tough, what are the things that get you through that?
You got to have a close important inner circle. Sometimes it's not even connected to the business. I mean, I have a very supportive wife, family, and when things have gotten tough, they've been there for me. Mm-hmm. And you have to surround yourself with great people. I've been asked this question a lot, in different forms, and I couldn't have done it without hiring great people. I mean, obviously I've put a lot on your shoulders over the years, and if you don't have great people, you can never do it yourself. If you can keep it really small, you can do it all yourself. But if you're going to let it grow, having good people that you trust and know that can do the job is absolutely essential to success.
Well, with that being said, what are all the social media informations and how people can get up with you and, about WrestleCon, about High Spots? Where do we need to point them to?
Well, highspots.com obviously is the store. That's the flagship. And then Twitter, we have Twitter-Highspots. And I want to say one thing, because this is very important to me.
Okay.
And maybe this is showing my age. If you have a question to a business, do not go to Twitter and ask your specific question.
Oh, I know. Like we have support emails.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I understand like if it's a direct message because it's annoying me because High Spots did this but the thing is, when we correct that issue, and we're usually very quick to that, you do not then go tweet and go, hey, High Spots took care of the issue. No, you just let that negativity sit on your timeline for however long when there are proper channels.
So many people, hey, has my order shipped? And their name's not even on the Twitter handle. Like, well, who are you? You've come up with this creative Twitter handle. I have no idea who you are.
Yeah.
And you're expecting me to give you a response. So I think people, the people that watch this kind of realize that, Twitter is for fun. Twitter can be, if you're not getting a response from somebody, it's probably a great way to call them out. Yeah. But, email is still great.
Yeah, we still answer emails here.
And then for WrestleCon, WrestleCon.com, Twitter /WrestleCon. We don't really do a lot of Facebook anymore. It's more, I'll show you what I had for dinner type thing. But Twitter's where we kind of do our business.
Yeah. So. And of course, with the highspotswrestlingnetwork.com,
Yeah, I mean, you have to stay ahead of the curve if you want to be in this wrestling business. And I mean, obviously, everything's headed towards digital. So most of our attention, the new toy in the office is the High Spots Wrestling Network.
So I just want to put it out there because I usually come in on the weekends to work on it. So I just want to make sure people know it exists.
I know you're doing the interview, but I'll turn to for years we did highspots.tv, and then one day I'd just come into the office and say, "Hey Jake, we're not going to do that anymore. I know you've updated it for 7 years straight."
It was a sad day because it was 2009. I added a file every day.
Single day. That was always the goal. It's like, hey, listen, I don't care what you put up there, but just make sure it's updated every day. Make sure something goes up every day. And then it's like, yeah, Jake, I know you've been doing this every day for the last 7 years. We're not going to do it anymore. So we're going to change.
So let it disappear. But then, of course, that wasn't successful what we're doing right now.
Right.
We're doubly successful with the new format. Right. So I'm all about it, all for it. But anyways, Michael, thank you very much for taking time out of your morning. I know we've got a busy day ahead of us. So thank you for sitting down and talking to me.
Oh, I enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
I wanted to get this in. So thank you very much.
Thank you.